Filming motorsports can be some of the most exciting and most stressful projects that a filmmaker can take on. In this video, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips that will help you capture amazing motorsport shots. Hi, I'm Joe Nicolo, a filmmaker based in South Florida. I've filmed motorsports events like Formula Drift, the 12 Hours of Sebring, and the Nashville IndyCar Grand Prix, and have even been nominated for the Best Event Film at the International Motor Film Awards. Now, the first tip may sound like a very simple one, but it's one that's often overlooked by a lot of beginners. Movement in the shot can absolutely provide interest. However, let's keep in mind that we're already shooting high-speed moving objects here. The subject matter is what's providing the movement. A complicated camera move can take away from the sense of speed that the cars on track are creating on their own. Now, I'm not saying never move the camera, but what I am saying is that whether using a gimbal, tripod, slider, or easy rig, it's okay to let the viewer experience a static shot or two. Use camera movement to keep your edits fresh and exciting. When the viewer is watching the same camera moves over and over again, it lessens the impact of the movement that you're attempting to use to generate interest. In a sense, those movements are working against you. So to sum this tip up, don't be afraid to lock down your shots and let the subject matter provide the movement. Motorsports is, in my opinion, the most unpredictable sport in the world, and oftentimes that unpredictability can lead to some of the most dangerous things happening. Whether at a grassroots drifting event, the drag strip, or a huge event like IndyCar, when filming motorsports, always put your safety and the safety of your crew first. Most of the time, these events will have mandatory media briefings where officials will review safety policies, which often include where you can shoot from, what route you need to take to get to the shooting holes, and what areas are strictly off limits. There's a very good reason why the officials are taking the time to explain all of this to you, and that is first and foremost for your safety and the safety of the drivers on track. It's understandable that you want to get the best shots possible. Now, while I'll talk more about that later in the video, no shot is worth risking your well-being. Even in the event that you don't get injured, by not obeying the safety guidelines, you're putting yourself at risk of having your credentials revoked by the officials. And if you think they're joking when they say that, I can assure you they're not. When you're out shooting, be aware of your surroundings, follow the guidelines in place, and most importantly, don't risk your well-being just to get a shot. It's not worth it. One question that I'm often asked is, what's the best lens to film motorsports? Due to the run and gun nature of motorsports events, I prefer to film with a pair of zoom lenses. I always carry a mid-range zoom covering focal lengths of 24 to 70 and a telephoto zoom covering at least 70 to 200 millimeters. Depending on the track that I'm filming at, I may need to add a third zoom to cover longer distances. In that case, I'll add either a 100 to 400 or even a 150 to 600. The flexibility and speed of zoom lenses will help you to optimize your shooting schedule, especially during shorter events. Now, while zoom lenses are your best friend when shooting motorsports, don't be afraid to shoot on prime lenses. The benefits of having a good prime lens in your kit is that they're often sharper than zoom lenses. A fixed focal length prime lens will also force you to move around more to capture your subject. I found that when I shoot on prime lenses, I do tend to travel to a lot more spots around the circuit rather than camping at a few locations for longer periods. Ultimately, I highly recommend starting with a pair of zooms and building your lens kit from there. Once you've learned how to master zooms, incorporating prime lenses and even specialty lenses like anamorphics or an ultra wide or vintage lenses will help you to develop a personal style. If you want to see what lenses and other gear that I use to shoot motorsports, head over to the description of this video and click on the link to my website where I've written a blog post containing the camera gear that I personally use to film motorsports. The links on the blog are affiliate links which directly support this channel at no added cost to you. Now, with that said, let's move on to the rest of the tips. One of the most intimidating situations you may find yourself in when shooting a race, especially if it's your first time at a circuit, is knowing where to get the best shots. As I mentioned earlier, you'll more than likely be required to attend a media meeting where the officials will explain the approved shooting locations. However, that isn't always the case. If that does happen, it's always better to ask. Now, once you've found out where you're allowed to film from, you may be wondering what the best spots are. After all, some of these races happen very quickly and some circuits are gigantic and take time to get around. If you don't have the luxury of filming a 12-hour endurance race, you'll have to choose your shooting locations wisely in order to get the absolute best angles. When I first started out, and in fact to this day when I'm filming at a new circuit, I always look where the other photographers and videographers are shooting from. Now there's a catch. I don't copy their angles. What I do is I use their locations as a baseline. I do my best to come up with a unique angle based on what others are doing, because in the end, I want my work to stand out. And there's no way that's happening if I just stand there in a crowd. Now, there are only so many ways you could film a car racing around a track, even more so with drag racing. However, what I suggest is that do your best to experiment with the time you have and don't be afraid to try something different. For example, while others are standing and shooting over the Tech Pro barriers, I'll crouch down and shoot through a hole in the barrier. On the other hand, there are times when I notice spots where someone whose work I admire is shooting from. I'll take a mental note of that location and visit it at some point during the race. At that point, I'll do my best to explore ways to put my own spin on their angles. Learning from those more experienced than you is a great way to improve your work and leave the circuit with shots that your client will be blown away by. Speaking of those more experienced, here's a networking tip that I picked up from my buddy Mike. Always talk to your peers. It may sound simple, but for one reason or another, plenty of people in the motorsports videography field seem to avoid simple socialization, but don't let that stop you. Sure, a lot of us are focused on working when we're shooting these events. However, you'd be surprised how helpful your peers can be if you just initiate a conversation, even if just for a moment. There are a lot of people who you can learn from, and being closed off is going to prevent you from creating relationships. Never be afraid to ask questions. And while there are grumpy people who think you're just there to steal their jobs, there are some really amazing people who are more than willing to help newcomers. With that being said, if you have more questions about filming motorsports or filmmaking in general, I'd like to invite you to my one-on-one coaching. During the coaching session, I'll answer your questions, give you tips and guidance on filmmaking, and even critiques of your work. To reserve a coaching session, click on the Super Peer link in the description below. I hope you found these tips helpful, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, take care.